Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Right off the bat today, we are going to visually dissect the linguistic and structural architecture of the Tuesday Rosary based on the provided transcript. Now, whether you grew up with this practice or you've literally never heard of it, we aren't just going to recite what's being said. Instead, we're going to tear it down to the studs and map out exactly how it's built, looking at the structural framework that makes this kind of repetitive meditation so incredibly enduring. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap to map out the architecture of this oral tradition. First up, the opening prayers. Number 2, the repetitive prayer sequence. 3, the stages of Jesus' suffering. And finally, number 4, the closing prayers. All right, let's hit section 1, opening prayers. This is where we lay the foundation. So, before any of the actual rhythmic chanting or meditation kicks off, this session does something absolutely crucial. It establishes a firm, unshakable foundation of core beliefs. It's kind of like setting the rules of the universe before the actual play begins. The transcript opens with the Apostles' Creed, boldly stating, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." By starting with this massive cosmic declaration, the speaker is mentally dropping an anchor. They aren't just saying words, they're consciously aligning themselves with a macro-level theology. This specific opening quote acts as a foundational anchor of faith for everything that follows. It's the grounding wire for the whole shebang. Moving right along to section 2, the repetitious prayer sequence, let's look at the structural engine. And this brilliantly illustrates the looping structure of the whole thing. Once that cosmic foundation is set, we shift gears completely. We move away from the individual words and look at the brilliant structural framework holding it all together. You see, the vast majority of the transcript is made up of this very precise 4-step sequence. Step 1 introduces a specific mystery or event to think about. Step 2 is a single Our Father. Step 3 is your core rhythmic engine, 10 repetitions of the Hail Mary. And step 4 closes the loop with the Glory Be and the Fatima prayer. Then, the whole loop just starts right back over again. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, this single repeating block is called a decade. If you look at the transcript, you can physically see these massive blocks of text repeating over and over. For non-practicing viewers, think of these decades as the fundamental building blocks of the oral tradition. They create this highly predictable, rhythmic environment for your mind to operate in. What's super cool here is how this structure strategically shifts your attention. Look at how the prayers within the loop systematically and intentionally change focus. First, you're talking directly to God the Father. Then, for the bulk of the time, those 10 Hail Marys, you're hyper-focused on Mary. Finally, the loop closes by shifting one last time, directing a specific plea for mercy to Jesus. It is a highly organized, rotational system that keeps you engaged with different aspects of the faith, all inside one single loop. On to section 3. Stages of Jesus' suffering. This gives us our narrative arc. This is where we get into the actual narrative of this Tuesday session, focusing on the sorrowful mysteries. And honestly, the psychology here is just fascinating. While the spoken words, the Our Fathers and Hail Marys, stay exactly the same in every single loop, your mental focus progressively shifts. Each decade gets a different historical event to visualize. So your mouth goes on autopilot with the chanting, which frees up all this cognitive space for your mind to deeply focus on a thematic meditation of suffering. The transcript actually plots a very clear chronological progression of events. You've got the first event, the agony in the garden. The second loop moves to the scourging at the pillar. The third is the crowning with thorns. Now, interestingly, in this specific text, it jumps straight from the third to the fifth event, the crucifixion and burial. That's a unique little quirk of this specific transcript, but it still gives the mind a linear, historical journey to travel on while the cyclical prayers run in the background. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the original language anchors the speaker. The source text uses these incredibly visceral, physical connotative phrases to kick off each loop. We're talking descriptions like sweating blood, being tied to a stone pillar, and wearing a crown of thorns. These aren't just floaty theological concepts. They are heavy, they're tangible. They ground their repetitive chanting in visceral, physical imagery, pulling the meditation out of the clouds and tying it directly to a relatable human experience of pain. Finally, the repetitive narrative hits its absolute climax. The final meditative event in the text details the crucifixion and being placed in the tomb. This wraps up the historical timeline. The active visualization part of the story is officially done, which perfectly sets the stage for the final act of the session. Which brings us to section 4, closing prayers, and a dramatic shift in tone. Once the rhythmic cycles stop and the history lesson ends, the transcript reveals this sudden, dramatic shift. Up until now, everything has been historical and reflective, right? You're looking backward. But in the closing prayers, the tone sharply transitions. It flips from an objective look at history to a deeply subjective, highly emotional plea for help right now, in the immediate present. Just listen to this excerpt from the Hail, Holy Queen, near the very end. It translates to mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Wow. I mean, that is incredibly poignant. After spending the entire session meditating on the suffering of Jesus, the text yanks the focus right back to the human condition, the active, present suffering of the person actually saying the prayer. It's a moment of profound, deeply personal vulnerability. Let's move to and see how this builds the overarching narrative arc. Look at the bookends of this transcript. It starts macro with this huge cosmic declaration of belief in the Apostles' Creed. Then it uses these structured, repetitive loops to guide your mind through a historical narrative. And finally, it ends micro with an intimate, highly emotional, present-day plea in the Hail, Holy Queen. It's an entire journey from macro theology right down to micro humanity. So what does this all mean? Well, by mapping this transcript out, it's pretty clear this isn't just a list of words. It is a meticulously engineered piece of spiritual technology. The repetitive structure frees the mind, the visceral imagery focuses your thoughts, and the changing tone guides your emotional state. It leaves us with a really profound question. How does this structured repetition in oral traditions actually key into universal human psychology? Why do these looping formats naturally aid our focus, our memory retention, and help us reach deeper meditative states? It's literally universal human design at work and absolutely worth thinking about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.